Hi, Anjana. It's great to have you on this fireside chat for Spectra, and it's great to be talking to you again. I guess in a short span of a couple of weeks, and
Yes.
I mean, I'm as excited as I was when I first spoke to you for Mrugashira podcast.
So thank you so much for having the conversation with me again because sometimes otherwise it can get boring. So thank you for this.
So, I'll just jump to my first question, Anjana, which is that, if you look at storytelling per se, right, it moved from, let's say, information dissemination to messaging to now storytelling, right? As communicators, this is a kind of journey that many of us who have spent about 10, 15, 20 years in the industry have witnessed, right? So, why has storytelling become so important in its current avatar, and particularly for B2B brands? I mean, it started off as B2B brands, and now I see a lot of B2C brands also jumping into the bandwagon. So, what is it that about storytelling that people are so excited about?
So I think fundamentally it's because there's been a huge shift in a how we consume information, b the amount of information that's available out there. On the multiple platforms it's available on. So there is so much of noise, there is so much of clutter and such a huge information explosion that just shouting out loud or repeating a message doesn't really get through to the audience because it's almost like a screen where you see things just whirring past at great speed, right? So you need to get heard in a way that is memorable and also
Mhm.
relatable. And if you provided you're in a place where your audience is listening or watching out for stuff. So if you look at history, whether you can go back hundreds of years, you can go back centuries,
Yeah.
the way information has traveled is through stories. The earliest form of communication was through stories, right? And a lot of the stories that we have now are stories that have been passed on from generations. Almost every child has had the experience where someone has told them a story, whether it's a parent, it's a grandparent, it's a sibling, it's someone in school, a teacher, irrespective. That almost cuts through class, culture, generations, and continents. So, stories is how we relate to each other. There is emotion in stories. We're able to visualize a story when someone tells us what a story is. And I think that's the reason why, because the emotional connect is so strong. And the ability to visualize that and retain that in your memory is so strong. That's the
Mhm.
reason why storytelling is popular. I always use this example when people sort of think, oh, this can't be, or this is a little bit of spiel. It's like a simple test. If you ask an audience, can you just tell me what Newton's law of gravity is, what's the formula, and what's the theory? Everyone will look blank. But the minute you say, do you know the story about Newton and the apple? Everyone will smile and say, oh yeah, of course we know the story about Newton and the apple. So I think the reason that the theory has become popular or is memorable is because of the story of the apple, and that's a story that's passed on, for such a long time.
That's right. And also, when you talk to companies and when you talk to CEOs about their content strategy, right? How do you educate them about the importance of storytelling? Because many a times, jargons creep in, for example, or they would prefer to do in a very straight jacketed way, articulating their positioning statement, for example, or their narrative, for example. So, and also, are CEOs aware of the power of storytelling? How do you go about convincing them about the power of storytelling?
So, the rule that I normally follow is I always start with a story. And it has to be a story that they can relate to, something that's in their field, and they're able to see the difference between, what you rightly pointed out as a statement of purpose or fact and a
Yeah.
story. And one of my favorite stories, which is a story that was told to me by a corporate, funnily enough, was the
Okay.
story of the late Professor Suda, who was, a TQM champion, and he was a consultant for total quality management. And this Japanese professor would come to India and teach companies about TQM. And one of the qualities that you need to be able to carry out TQM or total quality management is exactness. And if I were to say this to someone, I think almost half an hour after they leave the room, they would forget,
Yeah.
that there was this, that there was a person called late, there is late Professor Suda. He taught about exactness. But the story is this: that to all the factories that he would go to, he would wear white socks and he would walk
Mhm.
across the factory floor. And if the socks turned color, he would turn around and say, "You're not following exactness. Your floors are dirty." That's a very hard story to forget. I mean, you can almost visualize someone wearing white socks and walking on the factory floor, and then you understand what he means by exactness versus what is generally seen or perceived to be exactness. So I think if you're able to find a story and tell a CEO a story that they can relate to and they can understand, they start to see the power of storytelling. And you're
Mhm.
absolutely right that, people think storytelling is a new term, it's a fancy something, maybe it will stay, maybe it won't. But increasingly, research shows that we tend to retain facts, concepts, and everything. Just like we did with the Newton example through stories. You can remember it over years. I mean, this story about the socks I heard, I think, 7 years ago. So the tricky bit is not so much um, telling them that storytelling is a better way to communicate. I think the transition that CEOs haven't made that easily is being able to spend as freely on storytelling and explore the possibilities as they
Mhm.
have done with traditional mediums that they're comfortable with, vis-a-vis, say, advertising or a marketing collateral or an email or a flyer, and they'll ask you what's the call to action button, and those are the things that they're more concerned about. So I think navigating them away from a traditional form of storytelling to more exciting new forms of storytelling is where the challenge somewhat lies.
You pointed out about advertising and marketing collaterals and all that. So it just struck me. Have you ever come across a situation where either the CEOs or the heads of marketing feel that it's okay to be a storyteller in a commercial or an ad, but a marketing collateral need not be in that format? So that also means that your content strategy itself somewhere becomes a bit divided. Have you had such kind of experiences?
Yeah, I think it's one of the issues that we often face is that the marketing department thinks marketing has nothing to do with newer forms of storytelling. They still think in terms of advertising and selling an idea. They have not a lot. Some companies are nimble; they have made the transition. A lot of companies haven't made that transition. That your everything that you say about your company, everything that you communicate, can be storytelling on multiple platforms. Whether it's the CEO addressing a large gathering, whether it is in a kind of communication that you send out to your stakeholders or vendors, whether it's in how you talk to your consumers. So within marketing, I think there is a division which thinks that storytelling is a job of corporate comms and our job is marketing, whereas the two have more or less come together, or they need to come together for it to be really effective.
That's true. I mean, I don't think siloed thinking any longer works. I come to the next phase of this conversation, which is about your book. What prompted you to write the book, and what's your story?
Okay, so we do get asked this a lot. I think everyone takes off from the title. So, me and my co-authors, we've been storytellers pretty much all our professional life. First, as business journalists, we were in an environment which was a very demanding environment. We used to all work for Bloomberg News in Europe, mostly in London. And you had just a couple of seconds to decide what the story headline was. You had a few minutes, literally a few minutes, to write a story that would be accurate, and that too to a very demanding audience, which was brokers and fund managers at the other end of the terminal who were paying fat money to get that information in a concise, clear, and accurate way. So I think we kind of learned how to tell stories better during our stint in a newswire. And we took the skill as natural because I think we were so deep in it that we just thought this is great. It's only when we moved to other careers, we shifted out of journalism, and Mary Beth was teaching, Audrey went into corporate communications, I went into content strategy, that we realized that it is not a skill that comes that easily, and actually you have to train yourself. And we were trained in the environment that we were in, but we probably didn't realize it that at that point in time. And that the way to train yourself is to follow the rules. There are some good rules for good content. Follow the rules. It'll help you minimize the mistakes, learn the basics, get it right, and then you can build on, and you can keep learning as the medium evolves and changes, which it will.
Cool. And how difficult? I mean, three of you in three different countries. So how difficult was it for you to actually collaborate and write this book?
Um, it wasn't as challenging as it could have been. And I think the reason, again, was because we had worked in a very demanding environment. We had worked together. There were some basic principles of, writing that we all adhered to. We were very good with deadlines because that was a natural training for us. So if we said, oh, within a week, we're going to finish the chapter, we would finish that chapter within that week. There was a certain uniformity of writing style, again, because that's what we had learned. So when we look back, it was fortunate that all of us had the same training, and that helped us overcome what can become a difficult situation if you have authors in multiple locations with different styles. But that commonality kind of, kept us together.
And that made the publisher's job easy, I guess.
I think so. I mean, there were occasions, I would say there were maybe 10% of the things that we couldn't agree on entirely. We had differences of opinion, but that we kind of threw it at the publisher saying, okay, figure out, this is how we feel, what do you think? And we stuck with what the publisher said was, a better option.
Cool. So, and also, the way the book is written, it's almost like a guide on storytelling. So I just want to understand, why did you choose this style of writing?
So I think because we intend it as a book that will stay for a while. It's a book that anyone should be able to pick up at any point in time in their career. It can be a refresher course, even in a middle level cop comms role, or even a more senior role, because one of the things that happens is you get caught in what we call the jargon trap. There's a whole chapter called Death by Jargon in the book, which tells you
Yes.
how to get out of the jargon trap. And it's almost like pressing the pause button and saying, oh, I know I've just gone away, I've strayed, I can come back. And the book has chapters which can be read independently. So it could be that, you want to start a podcast for your company. There's a chapter on, the do's and don'ts of podcasts. What are the good examples? What are the bad examples? Even simple stuff like, how long should a podcast be? Can you get away with a 2-minute podcast? The answer is yes, because companies have done it. So the book was intended as a handbook, which is what it says, it's a business storytelling handbook. And so it was deliberately written in a way that would serve an audience that wanted to learn or refer to it. And it's got exercises built in to check, so people can go back and say, okay, I've read this chapter, how much of it have I understood? And now can I apply it using these examples?
Yeah, true. I mean, it's a very handy do-it-yourself kind of
Yeah.
a format. I do agree that. I now come to the next set of questions, and which is actually the last set of questions, which is that, in your assessment, when it comes to Indian brands and their adoption of storytelling versus some of the international brands, how do you see them? Because a lot of times, even when it comes to advertising, Indian brands are known to, in some ways, adapt what has been happening in the West, or with some of the successful international brands, right? So, how do you see in storytelling how Indian brands are faring?
So I think, the huge gap that we had, which
Mm-hmm.
was kind of very palpable in the early days in advertising and so on, I think that's narrowing because storytelling is becoming very hyper local and it's very targeted now. So what works in one market may not really work in another market. It's almost like, I like telling clients it's like a microclimate.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to do storytelling for, say, within India, tier two and tier three towns, which are really big markets, the tone and the positioning and the influencer you may use might be very different to someone you use for a large metro. And so it's become hyper local. I think Indian brands have understood that really well, and we are a very diverse market with micro pockets of whether it's language, behavior, climate, and our choices for everything, whether all consumer goods and so on and so forth. So that said, where international brands I think are a little ahead is in the use of technology. They may
Mm-hmm.
be able to do immersive storytelling a lot better. Or they're more invested, or they're more willing to experiment in immersive storytelling, which can be, a little more expensive. So I think
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't caught on as much in India, and it'll happen. But Indian companies sort of, I think, are maxing the storytelling game. So the recent example was, I think that was covered a lot in the media as well, was, Sabyasachi
Yes.
collaborating with H&M. I mean, of course, there was some controversy surrounding, whether you should support artisans or not. If you put that aside, and if you just look at the storytelling aspect, now that's a brand that's always had a very unique storytelling voice. They used a lot of local influencers. They were on the digital covers of many of the magazines, the fashion magazines. And I think they almost led the charge, though when you look at it, H&M is obviously a much larger company with a far bigger footprint as an
True.
international company. But it was the Sabyasachi collection that sold out almost within minutes of the store opening online.
That's true. So, you mentioned two important things. One is the diversity of our country, and when it comes to that, there is also the regional aspect to it, right? And the regional language hue to it. So, how has storytelling evolved in regional languages? I mean, does your book cover that?
No, our book doesn't cover the hyperlocal market in India, because really the book is meant for anyone in communications in any part of the globe. So what we
Okay.
have done is we've used some Indian examples in the book, but really it's got international examples and universal examples. We haven't tackled micro regional markets in India, but if you follow the rules that are there in the book on good storytelling, choosing the right channel, how to use your channel, how to write the right message, how to differentiate between your message and your mission statement, and how your message should reflect what your overall purpose is. If you follow the good rules in the book, you should be able to translate that into pretty much any market that you operate in. It's almost in that way, I would say it's region agnostic.
True, true, and also it's almost like a tool, right? Or like a
Yeah.
do-it-yourself kind of a kit. So
Exactly.
it's
If
just
you've understood it, you should be able to apply it to pretty much any situation of storytelling that you would encounter.
that's true. And that the other point that came to my mind when you were talking about this, Anjana, was that a lot of people today, a lot of individuals in their profile sort of say they are storytellers, right? And that somewhere becomes is it something overused, because then each and every person claims to be a storyteller but doesn't really sort of practice storytelling the way it should be practiced. So is it harming the entire storytelling phenomena, or is it sort of helping in some way? What's your thought?
So I think the fact that a lot of people are storytellers is a good thing. Sometimes we don't think of, when we think of storytellers, we think of it as a professional role. But when I say go on social media, I can see grandmothers there, right? I can see 5-year-old kids who have a following of like 1 million. And they are doing
True.
something in terms of storytelling. they are able to reach out to somebody and they're able to connect emotionally. And ultimately, that's the basic form of storytelling. Yes, you may not be able to take that and put it into a corporate environment, but I do feel there's room for everybody in this pie. In a corporate environment, you may need someone who understands multiple mediums, who can, handle everything from regular storytelling to having making sure that your storytelling is consistent across platforms, to dealing with a crisis, to any contingency, right? But that's that's a professional ask. But is everyone an innate storyteller? I genuinely believe that every human being has some innate storytelling skill, and that is a good thing.
That's true. That's true. And one of the things in corporate environment that all of us typically, encounter in our regular work life is crisis communication, right? And
Yes.
how does storytelling can be used in crisis situations?
So, what we always tell clients, and we've written about this in the book as well, there's a whole chapter devoted to dealing with crisis communications and, good and bad examples, is the most important thing in a crisis situation is to stick to the facts and be true as much to what's happening as is possible. Unless there is some kind of a regulatory over, framework which prevents you from revealing things. Don't obfuscate. Don't try and hide. Don't try and fudge. It's not going to work because people are very, very unforgiving of deception. And in the digital age, deception will live absolutely forever. It'll come back to haunt you when you least expect it. So the stories that you talk of or the stories that you tell during a crisis communication have to go back to your primary message, and they must be true. They have to be true. Your stories have to be authentic, and you have to communicate to the audience that you're speaking to that this is really the closest form of truth as we know it, and this is why this has happened. One of the classic, this already, of course, classic examples is the Johnson scandal. I think it was in the
Correct.
80s, where the Tylenol was laced with cyanide, and that could have finished Johnson, but Johnson did the right thing. They said, well, we don't know. We don't know how many bottles are contaminated, which was the truth. They didn't know. And they said, please don't buy Tylenol. And if you've bought it recently, please bin it. We're going to recall everything and we're going to come back to you with solutions. And I think the CEO did a great job of saying, we've recalled all the stock. It's cost us, but the safety of the consumer is more important. So that is also a form of storytelling, being honest and saying, I don't know how many bottles are contaminated, but I'm going to do what I think is right for the people.
Yeah, and sometimes it so happens that people tend to associate stories with something that is imaginary, for example, or that is not factual, or something that is sort of made up or fictitious. So, how
Mm.
does one fight that? I mean, because if you're stating a fact, why not state it straight? And why do you use, storytelling method?
So it's really because storytelling is how people will remember your facts. Otherwise, it's very hard to retain a fact. We're assaulted with facts the whole day. But one of the examples that we have in the book is, supposing I were to tell you, about an airline that can carry heavy cargo. You would say, oh, okay, fine. But if I were to tell you it's an airline that can carry up to 4 elephants, you will understand that I mean heavy cargo. And there's a very recent example, in fact, where I personally thought it was a case of the brand trying to preempt bad publicity from the consumer. So there is this
Mhm.
brand called ID, which makes idli and dosha batter. And
Correct.
their CEO, he's quite active on LinkedIn. He had this interesting post just recently where he talked about a customer experience where a customer came in and said that the dosha batter was sticking to the tawa. And so the ID salesperson went in and tried. And the customer was right. The batter was sticking to the tawa, and she wasn't able to make, the dosha the way it should come out. And the salesperson then went back and said, I think there is a problem with the tawa. And they went in and tried it with a different tawa, which must have been seasoned properly, and the dosha came out perfectly right. And that was a story which, to me, did two things. One, it sort of spoke to everybody who may have had a similar experience and was thinking, I'm not going to buy this batter again. It's forced them to rethink. It also showed that here is a company that really cares about what the customer thinks. But if you step back and look, all it is a story.
That's true. That's true. And I now come to my last question, which is that what's the future? How do you see the future for storytelling?
So I do firmly believe that a lot of it is going to be device led. The way we consume is more and more on our devices, right? And especially now in the post pandemic world, we still haven't gotten back to physical meetings and interaction, personal interaction, the way we used to. A lot of people are really interacting more and more with their devices. They're almost wedded to their devices. So the advancement of the device and the technology on the device will in some ways shape the way storytelling happens. It's likely to be definitely more immersive. You might see a lot more augmented reality, you might see a lot more VR. There is another interesting phenomenon that's happening because we're so inundated with influencer marketing. In the West, you're starting to see some amount of dissent, A, against heavy influencer marketing, and B, it's probably them trying to sift out fake news. Platforms like Substack are growing exponentially. And you have, writers, you have critics, you have reviewers on Substack who are being paid thousands of dollars each month, completely and only driven by their subscribers who get reviews in their inbox. And those are genuine reviews because it's almost like they've taken the narrative out of the brands and they've put their trust into an individual who's paid by them to give them an honest review. So that is a very interesting shift in storytelling that I think we'll have to watch for, where trust becomes, trust has always been important, but trust is something that is paid for in a way.
But there is also the proliferation of AI, artificial intelligence into storytelling. I did come
Yes.
across a book sometime back where one chapter of the book was written by an AI engine. So that takes away the human touch to storytelling, right? And the whole narrative of storytelling is that you sort of impact at the feel level or the feeling of a person, right? So how do you see this shift happening? Will AI be able to do you see this proliferating much greater level than what it is currently, and will that take
Um,
away the humanity or the human touch of storytelling?
so I think you're referring to Jaspreet Bindra's Tech Whisperer, right?
Yes,
That's
yes.
yeah, that's the book with the chapter. So at the Rio Olympics, I mean, this is a fairly famous example. I think almost 50 stories, definitely more than 40 stories a day, was written
Correct,
by an AI.
correct.
And all it did was it told you what the medal count was. It was, it was super fast. It was faster than humans. Almost as soon as a game was over, it would tell you what had happened in the game. And it was a Chinese media company that did it. I think Washington Post has an arm which uses AI to do some amount of storytelling, but that's a distinct kind of storytelling, right? That's getting the facts together and putting the facts out there. It may not be the most lyrical, poetic. It may also not be the most memorable piece, memorable story you've read. I mean, for genuine storytellers, storytelling is effective when it's memorable. And
Correct.
an AI machine can give you the facts effectively, very cleanly, and probably with even less error than a human. But will it be able to connect at an emotional level? I think we're some way away from that. Because, there is a nuance that a machine probably can't capture, and perceptions that it cannot capture. So, I mean, no one has seen the future, but I think in the foreseeable future, uh, the the stories that tug at your heartstrings, and the stories that you can relate to will definitely still have a human element.
So probably the lower end of the storytelling spectrum is what would be sort of substituted by an AI engine or by some kind of an automation.
Yeah, where where you say, supposing you're pushing out a stock report, that's happening even now. It's just numbers. What level did the market close? The biggest gainer, the biggest loser, what was the percentage gain? That's all data and fact. That's very easy to collate, and that's probably done more error free by a machine. But that is only a small subset in the large universe of storytelling. There is some amount of storytelling that cannot be done by an AI just yet.
Cool. Thanks, Anjana. Thanks for this interesting conversation. I wish you all the best, and
Well,
I
thank
look
you.
forward
Thank you
to our
for
second book on storytelling very soon.
thank you for that. And I do hope that people who are watching this will be encouraged to, buy a copy of the book. Am I allowed to hold it up and show it to people? Only because I'm so proud of it. There you go. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your fantastic questions, Radha.
Thank you.